Welcome to everyone here in Filene and to those of you joining online. My name is Liz McClintock. I'm the class of 86, and I am the chair of the Dickey Center Board of Visitors here at Dartmouth. And I am delighted to introduce this evening the Obenshain Family Great Issue Lecture and Conversation entitled More Than Lip Service, a conversation with former Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström about her quest to improve women's rights and the challenges of implementing a feminist foreign policy. Research and experience have demonstrated that the various roles of women are critical to securing a peaceful and sustainable future for our planet. Roles in economic development, at the negotiation table, in political leadership. Yet, as we will hear this evening, that role and those roles are increasingly threatened by the rise in authoritarianism, by each restriction or violation of women's rights around the globe, by each political delegation that does not include women, or by each peace process that does not assure justice for victims of sexual violence. This evening, we will learn more about what needs to be done to translate the idea of a feminist foreign policy into action. But before we jump into our conversation, I want to thank Bill and Penny Obenshain for their deep support of Dartmouth College. Bill is a member of the class of 62 and is a long-standing and revered partner of the college. And I am proud to say, chaired the Dickey Center Board of Visitors for nearly a decade. Bill and Penny are not able to join us in person this evening, and we hope they're joining us online. The Dickey Center is dedicated to addressing the great issues of the day, and as urged by former Dartmouth President John Sloan Dickey, to see the world's problems as our problems. More importantly, President Dickey's legacy encourages us to see what we here at Dartmouth and beyond can do to address those challenges. The Dickey Center mission is to educate, convene, and empower people, particularly students, to actively confront the world's challenges. The goal of the Obenshain Family Great Issues Lecture is to animate discussion of an important issue, hosting a renowned visitor who can elucidate the issue for us and in conversation with us. Since 2016, we've had a range of distinguished visitors. To name just a few, Hannah Teta, the former Foreign Minister of Ghana and UN Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Philip Zelikow, Director of the COVID Crisis Group and a former Executive Director of the 9/11 Commission, Antony Blinken, former Deputy Secretary of State, who is, of course, our current U.S. Secretary of State, among others. Our guest this evening is one such leader. Margot Wallström has had an illustrious career as a public servant, and as we were talking in our board meeting today, we want to encourage as many Dartmouth students as possible to consider a job, a future in international affairs, so public service is one route for that. She has served in her native Sweden and as well as at the European Commission and the United Nations. Early in her career, she was elected to the Swedish Parliament. She served successively several ministerial portfolios, and she took a bit of a break, serving as Executive Vice President of Worldview Global Media before returning to European politics, where she served as European Commissioner for the Environment, European Commissioner for Institutional Relations and Communication Strategy, as well as First Vice President of the European Commission. In 2007, Wallström became chair of the Ministerial Initiative for the Council for Women World Leaders. And in 2010, Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, appointed her the first special representative on sexual violence and conflict. Subsequently, after serving as chair of the University Board of Lund University in Sweden, Wallström was appointed Sweden's Minister for Nordic Cooperation and Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden and Minister of Foreign Affairs. Throughout her career, Wallström has sought to confront national and global challenges while promoting greater respect for women's rights and advocating for sufficient representation of women in decision-making roles. This focus is evident in her work on topics ranging from the prevention of sexual violence in armed conflict to working to reduce nuclear tensions on the Korean peninsula. Perhaps most importantly, Wallström has worked and endeavored to elevate the leadership role of women in foreign policy and has emphasized the need to translate that policy into concrete action. Tonight's conversation is moderated by the director of the Dickey Center, Tori Holt, who herself comes to Dartmouth from the worlds of diplomacy and research. As you know, she was former Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Security in the United States and also former Vice President Stimson Center, so this should be a fascinating conversation. So without further ado, I am pleased to welcome former Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström. Over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. Are we good? We can hear us. So I have to say, before I ask you about NATO and Russia, before I ask about climate change and a feminist foreign policy, or how to stop sexual violence and conflict, with that resume, did you know when you were born that you would go into diplomacy?
No, absolutely not. And I'm kind of still thinking, what happened? Because I come from a working class family in the north of Sweden. No background or context of political engagement or trade unionists or anything of that sort. But a neighbor asked me if I wanted to start a youth club, a local youth club. And she was a social democrat. So I said, yeah, that sounds okay. I'll do that. I didn't know much about it, I have to admit. But the times were political. I'm 70, so those years were... It was the Vietnam War that engaged us. It was what happened in Latin America with Chile. We followed everything that went on the international scene, and we were very engaged. So that really raised our interest in politics. It was foreign policy that did so, and also on nuclear weapons and all of those things. But I'm also a generation that had unlimited belief in the future, that we could do anything we wanted to. And of course, I come from a country where high school and university education is free. And of course, my parents wanted me to go to university or to study. And maybe I'll enroll here. Can I stay? Thank you for having me, I should say, because this sounds like a fantastic, and then to me, this is a fantastic place. But all the opportunities were open. And I often think of that now when so much looms over a new young generation, from climate change to, of course, still the nuclear option is still there, and wars going on in Europe. So it's a very different time.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my background. So I could never have imagined that I would end up in those.
So it sounds like you grew up in an era of optimism that you could make a difference on some of these major issues. And I'll come back to your role as foreign minister, but maybe start with something that many of us have been seeing in the news, which is the use of sexual violence as part of conflict in multiple conflicts around the world. And I think we first met when you were appointed by the Secretary General to take on what looked like one of the toughest roles in the world, a newly created post with the title of Special Representative Secretary General for the Prevention of Sexual Violence and Conflict.
Yeah.
And you had a resolution you could wave around. I'm not sure how much money, staff, or strategy you were also given at the time.
Nothing. I started from scratch. Absolutely, yeah.
But rather than say, thanks so much, no way, you said yes. So tell us a little bit about what motivated you and then what you did with that role.
It was really a naive optimism, I call it. That was our sort of motto. Let's and also meeting people like you, because we as she's saying, we met before, and she said, well, we as the United States of America, we should help her. We have to, how can we help you? How can we support you? And that meant a lot, that I knew that I had the US also backing our efforts. So it was really about setting up an office, recruiting a team, trying to formulate what exactly will we take on, what did it look like. And it was very much about fighting impunity for these types of crimes. It was a matter of traveling to all these hotspots and war-torn countries or post-conflict countries to listen to survivors. And I've said the whole day in meeting students also here that it left me with a heavier heart, but also with more hope for the future, because all of these survivors, they insisted in not being treated as victims only, but they want to have a say. They wanted to have a say. They wanted somebody to listen to them and take their views to the Security Council. And that was, of course, the most important, to write up reports, yearly reports for the Secretary General, but also make sure that we found new instruments like naming and shaming, making sure that we could name those perpetrators, groups and individuals, that we could look at sanctions, how to sanction them, that we could recognize that this is a threat against peace and security when this is being done to so many victims, to so many women, because the majority, of course, is women. We also immediately understood that this was not enough. There were other routes to take and other routes to explore, because women born out of rape, the children born out of rape was also an important. We didn't have the time or the resources to deal with that, but my successors have brought that up. This has become a weapon in the hands of terrorists, where they have traded women and also victims of sexual violence. So it was really exploring this, but also making sure that we had an agenda of placing it firmly on the Security Council's agenda.
Right.
That it must stay there, so they understand that this is part of every peace process as well.
So you had to both help define the concept of this as part of warfare and recognize that it wasn't just about feeling sorry for victims,
no,
even though that was part of the concern, but that the dynamics of conflict often meant this was a purposeful strategy to humiliate a population, to divide ethnic groups, to require it would have lasting effects in the community long after the initial violence was conducted. I think you traveled to Congo, for example, and there had been an area of mass rapes, and you knew that the women there were now shamed and could not go home to their families, which would mean that area, the land may not go back to the same families. So it became, I guess what I'm saying is, you had to both conceptualize and try and do something about this simultaneously to present to the Security Council. Yeah, if I have that right.
And this is a crime that can be commanded, condoned, or condemned. And I've said earlier today as well that there are these three misconceptions about sexual violence in war and conflict. The first is that it is inevitable, that this has been part of every war and conflict since time eternal, and then that it is unspeakable because it has something to do with sex. It has something to do with power. With a sexual expression. So it's not the other way around, important to understand. And the third misconception is that this is a lesser crime. And this has been used as a kind of defense in trials where one of the commanders in Bosnia-Herzegovina said, but I could have killed her. He thought that this was a lesser crime to rape a person that then will carry this stigma to the rest of her life. But this is exactly, we also discussed, how do we train peacekeepers? Because when we travel to all these war-torn areas, very often people said, so, but what about the UN staff? They also rape or use prostitutes and what have you. So we also had to deal with that, even though it was not exactly our task. But if you are given a uniform or a beret, you with it comes a responsibility. So looking at all of this, and also we introduced a team of legal experts so that we would get also the capacity to follow up and help with legal processes in those countries that needed it. And they have been very, very helpful. Fantastic team.
And what you launched, I think today, means that there's military doctrine in most governments about this being a command and control issue. You can find Army doctrine for the United States now. The UK has put this in their military areas and even hosted a conference on this, I think, long after you left your job. People like Patrick Kamert, who's former Dutch for Special Forces, talks about this as command and control. So just to say that what you started has had a long endurance to it.
Yeah, well, that was also the whole idea, to sort of put the foundation there and then to continue to work on it. And they have been fantastic people taking on and working on that. And Pramila Patton is the current SRSG. And of course, now she's traveled to Gaza with a lot of challenges in doing so and following up on accusations of sexual violence. And every time when the report was to be formulated and being put together, there were these countries protesting. And we had to go visit all these ambassadors and talk to them and say, well, we are not negotiating. We are putting this on paper, and this is the whole idea of it. But now I think it is firmly placed on the political agenda, which is a good thing. But still, the implementation is lacking, because even in the DRC, that was then called the rape capital of the world, they introduced legal processes. They had mobile courts. They had a number of different institutions or ways to deal with the problem. But if it is not in the sort of common understanding of the harm that this does to society, it's very difficult to get rid of.
Right.
And still a lot is missing.
Much to still do. I'd love to shift to your role as foreign minister. It's a big leap to go from being a senior UN official, however, to running your country. I think you're also deputy prime minister, if I understand it correctly.
Well, yeah. Formally, I was a deputy.
Formally,
yeah,
okay.
I stepped in if the prime minister.
Well, in charge of just foreign policy. Okay. But, I think you had a lot of challenges. The national interest, values and interest of Sweden. So it'd be useful to hear a little bit about how you thought about what your role was and then what you prioritize within that.
Well, luckily in Sweden, we've had a common understanding of the most important priorities for our foreign policy and security policy. Being generous with foreign aid, being a country that believes in multilateralism, a loyal member of both the United Nations as well as the European Union, active on all of these matters, advocating for free trade and all of those sort of the basic elements for our foreign policy. But I really felt that there was something missing that had to do with what I learned also from my experience from the UN. And I called it a feminist foreign policy. In all the other things, of course, to continue with that, not least making sure that we had peace and freedom in our neighborhood, and that was making sure that Ukraine can continue to be an independent country. So I called it a feminist foreign policy. And with that, I meant that we cannot get a sustainable peace if women are absent from peace negotiations, from any process in establishing peace. And this was, of course, I think that some of the old ambassadors, when they were gathered and I announced this as a new, I could hear them sort of, what is this? what is this and how is it going to be implemented, and what is expected from us. So I also understood that immediately that I had to give them some parameters for how to interpret it. What does it mean? And if you choose a somewhat controversial concept like that, you know that then you have to define it. So what is feminism? What is it? Well, look it up in Wikipedia, and it says it means that men and women should enjoy the same rights and obligations and opportunities, And then you have to give it content by saying we should look at rights, representation, and resources. Do women enjoy the same rights? Do they have the right to go to school, to have a job, to open a bank account, to start a business, to not be married away when they are children? What about representation? Are they there where important decisions are being made about their future and their country's future? And resources. What about budgetary means? Do they go to meet also the needs of girls and women? So to me, it is a very, very practical tool. That's how I saw it. But I also realized that we had to be credible ourselves. We had to make sure that we appointed ambassadors, as many women as men, to ambassadors, that we were credible in the kind of policies we have. And the first question I got was very often, but you sell weapons. Is that really in line with, you're a big weapons exporter? Is that in line with the feminist foreign policy? And I think this is another way of cutting it, to say that, it doesn't prescribe a certain sort of priority or selection of matters, or it hasn't solved all the problems, but it gives a role to women to make sure that they can be there where these important decisions are being made. But this has followed me all the time when discussing feminist foreign policy, because we are known as a country that have always been active on peace and disarmament matters and so on. So I think that it quickly turned into something that actually engaged also the old ambassadors that were not used to a concept like this with a feminist foreign policy, because they could see, if you look in your own country there where you are based, posted. So what about the rate of child marriages? What does that mean? Do women really enjoy the same rights, the same legal rights and human rights as men? And who do we invite? Who do we listen to? Also as diplomatic staff, and I think it led to a number of these sort of.
Did people say,
reflections?
This is silly, we already do all this, that these things you lay out are common sense? And
No, not really. They said, well, a lot is being done through the aid, our sort of assistance with aid, but not as part of our foreign policy.
Feel free to drink something. I think...
Sorry.
I think it's you declared this at a point when there had been an effort, I think it was 1999, 2000. Many governments were talking about an agenda called Women, Peace and Security, including the United States and a lot of governments, and said, we will commit to have more women involved in mediation and conflict analysis, implementation, not just victims, but seeing, and I think I've seen this, you've seen this, if you have a peace negotiation, it's a slightly different take on a conflict, and also they're part of implementing whatever is decided upon. Was that part of what you were trying to do? And if I could just tell the audience, if you haven't seen the documentary, there's one on her time as foreign minister, and when you announce feminist foreign policy, you can almost see the eyes rolling behind her of her colleagues, the diplomatic service. So I don't want to underestimate how challenging this might have been for you personally as well as on the international stage.
That's true, and I think we immediately also set up a network of women mediators and negotiators, experienced women ambassadors, and they were all deployed to conflict and post-conflict situations, and that inspired other parts of the world also to set up these networks. So I think it also makes you accountable. It creates expectations, and in the end, this became, I would say, a norm also in Sweden. So the opposition parties would also, you say you pursue a feminist foreign policy, so why are you not doing this or that? So that's that was interesting.
I've got a few more.
Well, they have skipped it, so it's.
I think there's 11 to 13 countries now who have followed your lead. Yeah. I want to give the audience a chance, but I had two more areas I wanted to ask you about. One is, I think that Sweden is a protecting power for the United States in North Korea, a country for which we have had very fraught relations. And could you tell us a little bit about what role you played in a mission to North Korea, trying to help, I think, release some people?
Yeah, well, we are a protective power since we've kept our embassy in North Korea open all these years from the, in the 60s? And we are also protective power for Australia and Canada. And we have also managed to, for example, free some of the political prisoners or some of the people that they have put in prison there. So that has been exciting. And sometimes it takes that long for this to play out in a positive way. But there was an opening to discuss and to establish contact between South Korea and North Korea. And we use that opening because what you do when you are present for such a long time, it means that the North Koreans also trusted us, and we could talk to them. And I actually invited for the first time ever the foreign minister from North Korea. So he came to visit Sweden, which was very strange, maybe, or a very interesting experience. But it meant, all these contacts, including the meetings that we arranged between South Koreans and North Koreans, meant that for the first time in the Olympic Games that, happened in South Korea, that they had a joint team. And was it women's hockey or something? It was a strange, a little bit a strange sport. But anyhow,
people are fans of hockey here.
Well, I can't. Sorry, I can't even remember what the team was. But anyhow, they put together a joint team from North Korea and South Korea, and there were even discussions about a proper peace agreement. But I must say that President Trump, as it was then, put an end to all of that. So it stopped. And it has been rolled back the whole way, all of it, unfortunately.
So, well, thanks for sharing that with us. And I think despite your no longer being foreign minister, you're still tapped for international roles. And as I understand it, you've spent some time in Ukraine, and you were asked to help actually look at some of the environmental consequences at the behest of the Ukrainians. Is that right? Maybe tell us briefly about that.
Yeah.
I remember you said, I think many of us know this, but the Ukraine is the third largest producer of wheat in the world. So environment is not just trees. It's about the very economy and how Ukrainians feel about the earth. If I can capture that correctly.
It's such an amazing, vast country with rich natural resources. And they live from what nature can give. And sunflower oil, grain as the third biggest grain exporter in the world. And you could see that when the war broke out, that there was a crisis when they could not export. So, of course, the war has a heavy toll on the environment. And it's very unusual that a leader in the midst of a war presents a 10-point peace plan, as President Zelensky did in November 2022. And point number 8 was about the environment. This has been called the silent victim of war. So we know that, of course, the environment is affected by war, acts of war. But this means they have everything from bisons to dolphins. And dolphins also belong to the victims. So many dolphins have died in the Black Sea. But most importantly, the landmines that have been spread now and covers around 30% of the territory of Ukraine. And it will take several generations to clear those landmines. And it's a matter of how you do that as well, because they live from this rich black soil that they have. And if you use machines that will just scrape all of that off, that's not a good thing for Ukraine or for Ukraine's economy. So we have, together with Andriy Yermak, who is the chief of staff of President Zelensky, we have co-chaired a group of international members that have looked at recommendations for both the Ukrainian government, but also for the international community, how we can help to deal with this. We've done three things. We've been mapping and had an assessment of the damage that the war has done to Ukraine's environment. And with the help, not least of the environmental organizations and NGOs in Ukraine, they are very, very active and done an amazing job. But secondly, we looked at accountability for these types of crimes. And the Ukrainians are interested in making this a fifth crime under the Rome Statute, so to call it ecocide. And that's a debate that has been going on for a long time. They have it in their national legislation, but they want this to be under the Rome Statute and the ICC to be able to deal with it. So that's one area. And the third is really how do you reconstruct, how do you rebuild a country from rubbles and do it in an environmentally friendly way and sustainable way. So that has been a very, very interesting and meaningful task, I would say, and amazing to work with all the Ukrainian friends, because we learn a lot from them. They say, we cannot say goodbye in the same way as we used to. We'll see you. That's not the way to say goodbye, because you don't know if you would see that person again. So you take it much more seriously. So I think we have all learned from that, but they are also impatient. So we have had only a little over half a year to finalize our report, and it's now handed over to the president. And we are trying to help with the implementation as well.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a wide scope of many, many things you have worked on. And is your microphone not working very well? I'm so sorry. Can you all hear? All right. I want to open up for a conversation with the audience and see, we've laid out a number of things that people could ask about, or Sweden's role in NATO, for example. And we have some microphones here. I see Prescott in the back. All right. I think we've got a gentleman over here.
Thank you. What was the reason for Sweden's hesitation in joining NATO?
Yeah, we have, for many years, we were first neutral for a long time, and then we were militarily non-aligned, as Finland was as well. We have a long tradition of being working for peace and disarmament and against nuclear weapons and all of that. We have many of our well-known leaders who have been Nobel laureates, peace laureates, because of their work against armament and for disarmament and peace. So this comes from a long tradition in Sweden, but of course, when Finland now, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, when Finland and the Finnish president in a speech on New Year's Eve said that, for all these years, I've been able to call the president of Russia, and we have solved problems that we've had with a very, very long border that they share with Russia, and I can no longer trust him. It's unpredictable. I cannot know that what he tells is the truth, or what kind of reality he lives in. And when they decided to join NATO, since they have always had that option open, we decided, of course, that we had to follow. And Finland is the country that we've had the deepest defense cooperation with also over time. So it came as something that I don't think people sort of happily exactly were very happy because of it, but this is a new reality, I think it has to do with our history and with the kind of reputation that we've had. We have lived happily, being militarily non-aligned for so many years as well, and we have been, as I said, a loyal and active member of both the United Nations and in the European Union, and partnered with other countries that also have been militarily non-aligned. But this really changed our views on that, and me too. I have accepted that this is what we had to do.
Do you feel that Sweden is threatened by Russia?
Yeah, I think we all are. We have to understand that we have to help Ukraine to defend themselves. And the minute that Russia feels that they can sort of take over Ukraine and rule over Ukraine, then everything is open. That's a threat to our whole security order, the European security order. So of course we have to understand that this is a very dangerous situation. But also we cannot allow them to threaten to use nuclear weapons. And in the shadow of that, they can do anything against Ukraine. Because that was not how nuclear deterrence was planned to work. And the minute you have started to threaten to use nuclear weapons, you have already destroyed that kind of safety net. That's how I see it.
All right, great. I mean, I think that's something that's very live right now. People wondering if these are idle threats and or would the West provoke Russia if it continues to arm Ukraine and or eastern parts of Europe.
But we have to help them, because this must be a NATO, the most important thing for NATO as well, isn't it? What should we have NATO for if we cannot help Ukraine to win in this situation? Because Russia will not stop with taking Ukraine. And we have to understand that this whole reality that President Putin lives in is a very, very different one from what we know. So I think that this is really what became clear from listening also to the Finnish president then.
Very good. Okay.
Because they have been sort of sleeping with the bear, or not sleeping, but they have had to share a border with the bear.
Sure, that translates in many ways. I think Prescott, we've got some questions over here on the aisle.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for coming. I really appreciate your conversation here. I was wondering if you could speak more towards the gender-based violence security issue, and I was wondering if Sweden's joining NATO will put gender-based violence as a security issue more towards the forefront of NATO's concerns, and in that vein, if there's a way to put gender-based violence weaponry at the forefront of the concerns in Ukrainian war policy.
I think that NATO has a policy on this. They've had some really good representatives working on these matters, but I think that member states have to insist on this and placing it sort of giving it a more prominent role. And I doubt that my government, it's not my government, but the Swedish government, now that they will make this a thing where they are very active. I hope so, and I think that we can help from the opposition as well to push for it. But as with everything else, it needs somebody giving it priority and talking about it and lifting it up as something that means a lot to any organization. And we want women as well to join the army. We want them to be active in sort of civil defense and all of that, where they have to know that they are safe, that they are respected, that there is a role for them. So I think you're right in saying that this ought to be mentioned and given priority.
All right. Another student up here. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I just had a question on the sexual violence part that you discussed earlier. How do you distinguish between when sexual violence is ordered as a strategy by the state and the military versus when it's soldiers committing it on their own accord? And when it is soldiers committing it on their own accord and the state refuses to punish it, do you think there could be a more expansionary international legal mechanism to punish individual soldiers, or do you think there are any other mechanisms that the international community can take to punish individual soldiers?
I think that there is, as I said in the beginning, this can be commanded, condoned, or condemned. And I think that it falls a heavy responsibility on commanders. And of course, today, most of these groups are not well-trained, disciplined armies that the state can sort of train, but guerrilla groups or this kind of loosely put together groups. So, but most of the time, commanders know exactly what is going on. And this is a matter of accepting this and letting it happen under their watch. And we want commanders who say, I will never allow this to happen under my watch. So I don't think we distinguish between, we point to the command responsibility, and we don't distinguish between what individual soldiers do, but we point to it as something that is a threat to international peace and security when it happens. And very often this is like mass rapes or many sexual violence incidents as well. So this is also what we've seen through history, that it happens like that. It's like this is the reward for successful soldiers, that they can rape women on the way, marching on their way home, or when they leave a place. So it's a very sad story about how sexual violence has been used. So I think this is, again, to make sure that there is no more impunity for these crimes, but to follow up also with a legal route.
Very good. I think in that case, there was, after Russia's most recent invasion of Ukraine, there was a lot of conversations early on about potential peace elements. And I remember after the Russian attack in Bucha and the atrocities committed, at least from the Washington point of view, I heard, we're not talking right now. And it was the atrocities that meant there was no space for negotiations, at least in that short term. So it gets to your point. It was organized, it was seen as purposeful, and therefore delegitimized at that moment any kind of peace talks. So it has consequences in addition to the victims.
You become very cynical. If you have studied this and followed it and heard all the stories, you become very cynical, because it's rare that this does not happen at all in conflicts. It's almost impossible that this is not part of any conflict. And of course now the discussion is about Gaza and of course the horrendous stories about what Hamas has done to all of these women and girls. But I'm afraid that even the IDF that is considered, the Israeli forces considered very well trained, but it happens also there. So this is what has to be shown a light on, and continuously so.
Thank you. I see a hand up here and then in front with Tom. Lizzie.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to bring up the broader trend of women's rights because it feels like for generations we have slowly been expanding them, not just here in the United States and in the West, but around the world. But some recent things have suggested that maybe that trend is turning around. I mean, everything from increases in violence against women and children around the world to matters of course, there's the Taliban in Afghanistan, but even places like here in the United States with the rollback of women's reproductive rights. And then something as recent as just, I believe it was maybe 3 weeks ago, Gambia voted to repeal a law outlawing female genital mutilation, and then a push of kind of more traditional family values in more kind of populist governments around the world. So it feels as though there is a push to roll back those rights. And I'm curious what you think is causing that recent trend, and how something like that becomes kind of more of a global phenomenon and not just something that seems to be happening in isolated places.
No, you're right, and I think I spoke to the students earlier today about the fact that there are now 90 edicts announced from the Taliban, and the last one was about them restarting stoning of women, stoning women to death because of adultery, and of course they've been stripped of all their human rights, the right to an education, the right to be outdoors, so they can no longer go to national parks, they cannot go to the hairdresser, they have to. I tried to turn it around. I tried to create a story about what if we woke up one day to the news that a country the size of Afghanistan, a women guerrilla had taken over. And they had just announced their edict saying that men from now on boys will not go to school. Men cannot leave the house without being accompanied by a woman or their sisters. They have to be dressed in a particular way. They should wear a helmet and gloves and, whatever. Yes, and this is what happens, we start to laugh. But this is exactly what happens to women in Afghanistan. And what if it was the other way around? What would the world say? And how would the world react to that? This is unacceptable. We have to get rid of this regime. That is what the world would say. But this can go on every day. And of course, women and girls commit suicide because they see that there is no future whatsoever for them in Afghanistan. And I don't know if there is no simple answer to why there is this sort of pushback against women's rights. We have to continue to fight for our rights. And we have to prove that this is good for the whole society. This is good for men and the children as well, if women enjoy the same rights and opportunities and obligations. And I think that fanaticism is really, fanaticism is really the one of the reasons to this. So religious fanaticism, I fear that a lot because it comes to a large extent from that as well. I can recommend a book. You should read Amos Oz' book, How to Cure a Fanatic. That's a little booklet that has to do with these things. But I fear that this is happening also in Europe with a pushback against the sexual and reproductive health and rights. And this is because we have democracy is losing ground. And that means, we see that there are more autocrats, and autocrats elected and sometimes re-elected, they start by making sure that they control women and women's reproductive opportunities. So this is something that has spread around the world. So we have to come together. We have to support each other. We have to work on, of course, establishing the laws and the legal rights for women, but also helping and and giving each other encouragement to work against these extremist positions that we see around the world.
I think we had Tom right here first, and then Tanya, and then Sarah.
Minister Wallström, thanks so much for coming to Dartmouth. I have two parts to my question. First of all, you've been extremely successful in your career. What are the leadership qualities that you admire, and what were your own personal strategies you would use as a leader to get things done and accomplished? And related to that, as a leader in foreign policy, there's concern now in the world that the post-World War II international institutional framework of security is being degraded. When you are out there trying to put into effect foreign policy, which institutions do you think are the most effective in getting things done?
Well, this might sound naive, but we talked about this, you and I, yesterday, Tori, and I said that I believe that if we can invest so much in militarizing the world, because now every country is increasing their military budgets, and this is big money, like never before, over $3 trillion are used to sort of producing new weapons. And if we can do that, why don't we at the same time invest also in political and diplomatic contacts? I mean, we ought to open more embassies around the world. We need to make sure that what was considered the first line of defense, that is the political and diplomatic dialogue around the world, that we also invest in that. And I know that the saying goes that vinci pacem para bellum, that the Latin for if you want peace, you have to invest in you have to prepare for war. I think if you want peace, you have to prepare for peace as well. So this is my naive view on actually also making sure that we can put some money to where it is badly needed today. I believe when it comes to leadership issues, I don't know, I haven't taken any courses, and I'm not sure that I'm always a good leader. I think when you're on a post, like being a foreign minister or the post that you had also, Victoria, it means that it brings out the best and the worst in a person. Really, you're so stressed out very often that you are not kind at all, and you cannot listen any longer because you just run from one fire to another. But you can also be brilliant, probably, because you're forced to really shape up and focus and concentrate and come with a solution. So it brings out the best and the worst in people. I think that you have to become a good leader, you have to know yourself first and foremost. You have to know your shortcomings, you have to know your strengths. And if you do, you know that you have to compensate for your own impatience or whatever, your vanity or whatever. And you have to compensate for that by choosing team members that can help you and complement your own. And I think also if I have a chance to meet with students, as I have today, it has been, thank you, all of you. It has been fantastic. And so clever questions, the smartest questions and the most sincere questions. Then I often say, you have to do something more than self-service. Because I think if you study in a university like this one, you will get a well-paid job one day. You will get a good position, a good job, but do something unselfish. Complement selfies with something unselfish. Read books, because I think you have to be more compassionate and step into the shoes of somebody else. And you do that with reading a lot, reading books. And I even quoted Kafka, because Kafka said that a book should be like an axe to the frozen sea within us. And I think you have to establish your own values. What do you think is right and wrong in this world? And the people we admire most, the people we look at as role models, they have had very strong ideas about what right and wrong is. And they are brave, but they are brave in a way that they overcome the fear because they know that this is the right thing to do. And be kind. I think that's how we change the world around us in our immediate close environment. And then the last thing I would say is do I speak too long?
No, please.
I think that the last thing is that I have always set an agenda. And I remember every post that I've had, I have set my own agenda. And not that I haven't accepted that with it comes a certain, number of things that I have to do, but I've also tried to formulate my own agendas. And then, you create accountability because people then can test you against those promises, that they will recognize me because I will do this and this and this. So I think that's important also, that you come with some kind of ideas of what you really want to do.
Fantastic. Okay, I think I saw Tanya here and then Sarah.
Thank you so much, Minister Wallström. I think my question follows the one that came from the back of the room on sort of really the rise of anti-rights, anti-gender movements. And, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the new Swedish government has also abandoned the feminist foreign policy. So I'm curious to hear, what is your assessment of that? Is it more a political tool? Is it more ideological? And what is your sense of how then Sweden is working in countries like Gambia, like Uganda, that it may be flirting with a rollback on, LGBTI rights, on FGM, and what are the tools that you think Sweden will be using in those countries, which are not as extreme, say, as Afghanistan, but where we're really seeing a pushback on women's rights?
I was thinking when they took office, I was thinking, well, it must have meant something if this was the one thing on the first day they declared that they would stop doing. It must have meant something that I was... so important. They never liked it, that I called it a feminist foreign policy. And then I tried to be generous. I said, well, you can call it whatever you like, but if you do what is meant with that policy, if you continue to implement that, they'd call it whatever. But they have not, because it was not a priority. They have not continued the network of women mediators. They have cut the budget to UN Women and all the organizations, the UN organizations. They have put much more focus on trade. So now also the foreign aid policy will be about trade. And that's fine, they can do that. But of course, they also ignore very much the civil society organizations that have built the confidence and built activities over centuries, in some parts of the world, and they are just sort of ignoring that. And so I'm very disappointed in the way they are pursuing this. But it's politics. It's politics, and also the fact that they never liked that expression of a feminist foreign policy. Right. But it's still out there to judge what they're doing.
You spoke so passionately about Afghanistan, and it strikes me that 2 years ago there was very heated debate, even among feminist foreign policy circles, feminist groups, like-minded countries, about how to engage with Afghanistan in light of some of the earlier edicts. And now there's just silence in many ways. And I'm wondering how you, as a leader in the feminist foreign policy thinking and movement, how you think about how we should be engaging now in a way that is supportive of Afghan women, and what that means in terms of engagement or lack of engagement with the Taliban.
That's a very good question, because nobody today has a proper answer. The people in Kandahar that decides, that gives the religious direction for the Taliban, they cannot be negotiated with. They are not interested in dialogue. But we started a women's forum on Afghanistan 2 years ago, and this was an idea of showing solidarity with women in Afghanistan, and also to try to create sort of meeting places for women leaders from the rest of the world and with Afghan leaders in the diaspora or in Afghanistan. And we have arranged a number of events, and we've tried also to reach to the countries in the region, because they are important. What they do could actually affect the Taliban. But as it is now, very little movement, almost nothing. We haven't seen anything in the way of rolling back, not even allowing girls to go to school, which was a promise they made. Because in Doha, when they met after the Taliban takeover, they promised to let girls go to school, but that is not happening. And instead, it's more and more of these edicts that are very, very rough. So I think we can just have to continue and also see what can be done economically. And I don't think that we should give them recognition, but rather I was hoping that a group of feminist foreign policy countries, that they could do something very concrete, like saying, we will support women journalists from Afghanistan. We will protect them. We will let them get a place, a safe place in our respective countries. And we can invite like 200 of these women journalists, and they can tell the stories of Afghan women. I would like to see more of these very concrete actions. But it's very difficult. We are trying everything to talk to neighboring countries, to talk to different institutions, but so far very little progress. They are just it's a very to them it's a religious thing, but of course scholars, Muslim scholars, know that this is not at all a Muslim idea.
Right. I think we're going to have to wrap up, but maybe the last question is mine, which is, so you chose diplomacy, and I think you also have some really strong feelings about what diplomats' responsibilities are. And I'm sort of curious if you could share that with us, and what you think beyond that we should have more embassies. What do you think the role is for diplomats today, given the challenges across the world that are quite tough? As you describe, even in Europe, you're facing potential conflicts, perhaps unimaginable even a decade ago. So what would you tell us about the future of diplomacy?
Well, we have to defend multilateralism, international cooperation in all its forms. We have to argue for that. We have to invest in that. We have to take care of democracy and the democratic foundations, because I worry a lot about this, and I think that the deep inequalities that we see in the world today is part of the explanation why democracy is failing also in so many places, because people feel they don't get anything from living in democracies. So why not give these the strong men a chance to show what they have to?
How do we get multilateral organizations to work, though, if the natural politics of these organizations, which is exactly what they're designed to address, have gotten so severe? Like, look at the Security Council, which Sweden ran for. And I forgot to mention that. I think even with the controversies in your campaign, you beat out 2 other European countries with the greatest votes to join the council. Some of these are really struggling over U.S., Russia, China, and other nations fundamentally disagreeing about key issues.
Yeah, but it's still the UN we have. And we have to make sure that we continue to try to reform it, because it has very little legitimacy. The same moment that Russia is chairing the Security Council, it invades Ukraine by force, and this is like you couldn't make it up. So of course it has very little credibility when this can happen. At the same time, we have all the UN agencies out there in reality doing peacekeeping operations, keeping people alive in the most difficult situations all around the globe. And without it, we would have to invent it. But the thing is, we have to find solutions to the very bad situation that the UN is at the moment, and the Security Council in particular. So, do you think I have all the answers?
Well, I get to ask the tough questions. I don't necessarily. Well, I do think you'll leave us with a bit of optimism, because I think you've taken on some of the toughest issues I've seen. Sometimes tough because they're ill-defined, or they're an idealistic speech and you were asked to carry it out. And what I'm impressed by is you always tried to make it concrete and real. And you talk a bit about the bravery of diplomacy. So I think your charge to all of us is to be brave, to set your own agenda, and be kind. So I think with that, and read books, good books.
I think they are here.
We have lots of books here.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you have the young students here. You have well-educated, smart students. They are the hope for the future. They understand everything about climate change and how that will affect us. They know what the world looks like. They want to continue to live. They want to have a life. So it's for them also, of course, to do a lot. But they are the hope, and they have to understand that they have a role to play. That it's not only to sort of, float along the river, but also to do some fighting. It's necessary again to fight for democracy, to fight for equal rights, to fight for women's rights and humanity in this world.
All right. Well, that is a high call, but we will end it with that. Please join me in thanking the Minister of the Burn.